Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on today's episode, first, I want to start with a question. Have you ever wondered how your early childhood has impacted you as an adult? That's the question that my guest today, Dr. Carol Scott, who is a child developmental psychologist, is going to answer for us. On top of being an expert in child developmental psychology, she's also an author, a speaker, a consultant, a former CEO, and a director. So she fully understands this space and has so much to offer. And before you get nervous, there's hope for all of us because she developed a model called the SAS, which is the Self-Aware Success Model, that's going to help us really take a look at the first 7 years of our lives. And when we understand that, it's going to help us to live better in the present and, I believe, set ourselves up better for the future. So let's get into it. Carol, thank you so much for being on the podcast. When I was reading your bio and your expertise in this area, I thought this is so relevant and so important to the environment that we're in right now. So I wanted to really try and get an idea on the model that you use, that you created, this unique model around building better relationships, which I think we can all benefit from, whether it's personally or professionally.
Thank you, Patrick. I really appreciate you having me on this show. And I'm excited to talk about the self-aware success strategies, what I call your SAS. And I believe your sassiness is your birthright, starting right from the minute you're born. And this model is based on early childhood development from birth to 7, which is a little bit strange for a lot of people. They don't think about their adult relationships as being about who they were from birth to 7. But in my view as a developmental psychologist, it's entirely about that.
Yeah, which I will say for some listening might get a little scared thinking, what if their 1 to 7 wasn't that great? Does that play out as adults?
And here's a hopeful story. My 1 to 7 was really awful. My birth to 7 life was pretty awful. In the world of early childhood, we talk about these things called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And out of the list of 10, I had 7 in my childhood. And so it's possible to recover. It's possible to have positive childhood experiences that balance out the negative and give you enough resilience to survive the bad. And so what I also want people to know is it's never too late to change that. It's never really too late to have the happy childhood you deserved.
Interesting. Great. So when we talk about relationships, and before we started this podcast, I was telling you all of my work is on the leadership side within organizations. And I mean, this is all about relationships, right?
Yes.
And how important that is. So how do you help people in that regard?
And I come from the perspective of leadership myself. I had a career of leadership positions, running programs in school districts and universities and being the CEO for a nonprofit. So I get leadership and I get that it's absolutely not about the title on your business card or the level of your paycheck. It's completely about how well you can enroll people in a vision and keep them moving forward. It's completely about whether you can get your own needs met and move forward with people getting their needs met. It's all about whether you can negotiate for what you want. So it's really about these 7 attributes from early childhood. So let me just list them. Trust, independence, faith, which is a surprise for some people. And I don't mean religion by that. Negotiation, vision, compromise, and acceptance. And those are 6 key strategies that children use year by year from birth to 7 years of age, starting with trust as an infant. Think about an infant. They're born as basically like a little limp noodle who can't do anything for themselves. They need people to take care of them, or they will die. Frankly, human beings are the most dependent of species as infants. Yeah. And so we come into the world trusting that people will take care of us. And we, in our first 6 months, gather the understanding that either the world is there for us, it has our back, people come when we need stuff, or not. the world doesn't respond. We need stuff and nobody comes. And so those adverse childhood experiences, like you have a parent who's depressed or a parent who's drug or alcohol addicted, for example, might mean that you don't get your needs met as a young infant. And so you come out of that experience with the feeling that you pretty much have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
That's not something that's going to work very well for a leader. We have to be able to rely upon other people to meet some of our needs, even in a workplace. And they're just different kinds of needs than we rely on with our spouse or our best friends. But we still have needs in the workplace. We need people to follow through on what they say they'll do, for example. And we need to be able to trust that we can get that need met, or we wind up being a leader, a boss, a supervisor who is really micromanaging, or who just takes everything over and does it themselves and winds up with a plate so big that they can't handle all the work.
Yeah. To me, that one's a fascinating one. And I was just on an earlier call and we were talking about the level of trust as it relates to burnout within organizations. It plays into that. And trust really is this foundation, I think, of so much, but I had never really thought of it from that 1 to 7 standpoint of how important that is. I'm the youngest of 10.
Oh my goodness. It's a big family.
But it's interesting. There was a lot around me that I felt we were poor, but we were close, and I felt very safe in my.
And as the youngest, you probably actually got to have a lot of grown-ups taking care of you. There were older kids who were there to meet your needs as well as the two grown-ups if you had both of them. So
yeah, it's interesting. So one of my sisters, actually, we joke, was a surrogate mother for me at the same time as my original mother. So I totally get that one.
I think for a lot of us, I just want to add that for a lot of us, we have come to adulthood without really knowing what we need from people. It's not something we think about. We don't like feeling needy. We're told often that being needy is something unattractive. But the truth is, we're all needy beings. All of us humans need things from each other. And it's time to just suck it up and admit that we need.
Yeah, that's interesting, though, because, again, I look back from being in the environment that I was in, there was very much a sense of independence for me in that I grew up, I think, a lot faster in the environment that I was in, and we had a lot more responsibilities to take care of yourself. As a safety net.
Yes. Yeah. Good point.
Independence.
This is the toddler's success strategy. If you've ever met a toddler, that's a good word. You understand why I chose it. Independence is about adding to what you need, knowing what you think, what you feel, and what you want. It's the core of your personality. What do I think about? What am I thinking about? What are my ideas, my beliefs, my opinions? What do I feel? What are my emotions? And what do I want? What are the things I long for? And for a toddler, it's often something dirty on the ground. What is it that I want? And we don't yet know how to express that very well because we're toddlers and we can't talk very much yet. We don't have a lot of words and we can't put sentences together. And so we do a lot of expressing of ourselves in ways that appear wild and untamed to the untrained observer. So lots of toddlers appear to be terrible. People label them as terrible. They think that they need to break their spirit. Unfortunately, there's a long parenting tradition about breaking the spirit of toddlers. And really all they're doing is saying, look at me, this is who I am. Look at me, this is what I want. Look at me, this is how I feel. And they're just all over the place with it. But they will grow out of that if we can help them manage that independence, if we listen to them and we see them for who they are and we accept that. But a lot of toddlers learn it's not okay to feel what I'm feeling. It's too big of a feeling for the people around me. They don't like it. They don't want me to think what I'm thinking. They call me names and they don't let me have what I want. My world is full of no. And so if you grow up in that environment, then it's very difficult for you as an adult to get what you want, express your feelings, talk about your ideas without curating yourself down into something smaller that you think might be acceptable to other people.
Interesting. When I hear you talk about that toddler, I think of as adults in organizations that may be demonstrating disruptive behaviors.
Absolutely.
Right? Is that really around oftentimes people feeling as though they don't feel either respected or heard or...
Yeah. And I think we go one of two directions. Everything's on a continuum. So either you become really acting out and disruptive or you become very quiet and it's hard to draw you out. But also this is the age where we start to develop alternative strategies. So this is our natural strategy, is to be ourselves, be independent, express ourselves. If that doesn't work out for us, then what we're going to do is become codependent. For example, we're going to always be trying to manage and control the environment instead of just expressing ourselves. So one of the things I really want people to get is if you have developed what you recognize as unhelpful strategies for relationship, give yourself a break because they came out of a process and you can undo them.
Yeah. Interesting in that as well, because when I think of that, I think we all have probably coping mechanisms, right, that have served us for a long period of time. And at some point, they don't serve us anymore. Maybe in the organization that we moved to, what was acceptable before or what I was able to do in this new environment does not work.
That is exactly right. We'll get to negotiation in a minute, but I had developed as a 4-year-old a strategy of manipulating people rather than simply trying to get what I wanted. I would try to manipulate people into giving me what I wanted. And when I saw it, when I finally was able to see it, it was a big blind spot when I was a young adult. I was horrified by how manipulative I was. And I've worked really diligently to become someone who can simply say straightforwardly, this is what I want.
Interesting. Yeah. So faith.
Faith, the 3-year-old child. Okay, again, if you've ever met a 3-year-old, this is so perfect. 3-year-olds run at the world on their tiptoes with their arms wide and their mouths open and their eyes like dinner plates going, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, look at all this. Because they finally stopped looking at their own navel. The first 2 years are all about figuring out how the mechanics work. How do I walk? How do I talk? How do I do this stuff? How do I manage this little body? And now they're looking around and realizing there's all this other stuff. There's this big world full of interesting people and things, and they have faith in the impossible. That's why I called it faith, because yes, religion is a form of faith, but you can believe in a lot of things other than a deity and a religious philosophy. You can believe that you can grow up to be anything. Yeah. You can believe that you're going to be the first ex-president, the first female president, the first black president. You can believe, 3-year-olds believe they can grow up to be unicorns. So faith is really all about imagination. It's about play, and it's about being able to dream the big dreams that people tell you are impossible. That's a pretty big strategy for a leader, I think.
It really is. And again, I will go back to thinking about environments that kids may have been in where they were constantly told they can't do something. Right?
Yes.
Almost to the point of their dreams are silly. Don't even waste your time doing that we build this protective mechanism where like, I can't do it. There's a self-efficacy to it. Is that?
Yes. And I think one of our biggest missteps as adults with this age child is to think that all that is cute, to laugh at it and think it's cute. And we develop kids who put on plays for us to entertain us instead of telling us what they really feel and what they really want and what they're really dreaming about, because we've minimized it into something small. Or we simply stepped on the dream and said, you can't do that. You're too little. Or that's not possible. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. And both my parents were very loving, but my mother was, I would say, more environment that she grew up in was definitely more of a don't dream too big, or there's a space that we live in. Right.
Yes.
And it wasn't negative from her standpoint or meant to shoot us down. It was almost just, this is the world that we live in.
Yes, very practical, very reality-based grown-ups. Yeah. And I want to say that adults who do these things, they're not mean people. They're not bad people. They're not abusive even necessarily. They're just doing what they do and living out the story that they have about life.
Yeah, interesting. So next is negotiation.
Okay, so now we have the 4-year-old. And the 3-year-old goes from that running at the world with their arms out wide and embracing everything to this little 4-year-old who crosses their arms over their chest and says, prove it. Show me. And they are all about reality. They really do go from being a being who's entranced by magic to being someone who wants to know what the rules are. And so it's all about getting what you want when you're 4. And 4-year-olds are great little negotiators. I think of them as the labor negotiators, the Henry Kissinger's, dates me a little bit, but the political negotiators of the preschool world, because they are really good at getting what they want with a win-win. What they're learning at 4 is that other people have things they want that are in conflict with what the kiddo wants. So I want stuff and I can ask for it, but I might not get it because other people want other stuff that gets in my way. So if I can learn what it is the other people want, then I can ask for what I want in a way that shows them that they're going to get what they want too. And they're masters at it if we let them and if we support them. And a classic example is a kid being offered something to eat for snack or for lunch. Do you want this or that? And very often they will come up with a third alternative that sort of blends elements from the two things offered and tosses in something novel. But they do that with increasing skill, tossing in that novel part in a way that stays inside the parameters of what they think the adult will allow. So mom offering snack has rules around that. She's not going to get in the car and drive to the store to get something she doesn't have in the house. It's got to fit into the nutritional plan for the day. It's got to be what she calls healthy, blah, blah, blah. So the kid starts figuring out some of those blah, blah, blahs. What are the set of limits in which the adult is operating, and how can I get something that I want, make it mine, and still work with her or the other adult?
But again, I am backtracking on this. There's not trust. If that hasn't been developed, then what happens with negotiation? Is it more about I'm going to get what I need?
Very perceptive. Yeah. And really, these all kind of build on each other. But that foundation of trust, independence, and faith, that's the heart of who we are. And if we don't get that stuff solidly put together, all the rest of this becomes really challenging to develop as a strategy. And we're probably in an environment of adults who are not going to foster it. If they haven't fostered those first three, we're going to turn into people who are already manipulating and already using alternative strategies. And that makes it more difficult to work with us.
Interesting. So vision.
All right. So from being the little labor negotiator of the preschool classroom, we go to the strategic planner. 5-year-olds are all about thinking about how things are going to go. And if you've ever had the pleasure of watching a group of 5-year-olds together, what they do is they huddle up and they talk about how they're going to play. They design, that's like writing a script for them. Okay, so we're going to play, what's the name of that red motorized, the Tony Stark character? What's he called? The robot guy that flies in the sky. I can't think of it. They're going to pick something out and they're going to say, we're going to play Batman, or we're going to play Star Wars, or we're going to play this. And they figure it out. They say, you're going to be this person and I'm going to be that person. And this is going to happen first. And then that's going to happen. And then we're going to do this. And they will literally huddle up for 30, 45 minutes planning how to play, and then dissolve and go about other things and never play that. The other thing that you see in 5-year-olds a lot is a desire to take things apart and figure out how they work, which I think is related. What they're doing is understanding how to get things done with other people. So it's not just about me having my big dream and going off and becoming a unicorn. Now it's about, I need to enroll people in a vision, a specific goal, and work with them as my allies to get there. Crucial for leaders to be able to do that.
Yeah. When I think of that as just what you said, I would guess there's curiosity there, right? You need to be
very much
just open to what's going on.
Yeah, very much. And again, this is a place where grown-ups inadvertently step on the idea by telling kids they're too little to do it, or they can't be done. 5-year-olds will come up with, 3-year-olds will say, I want to grow up to be a unicorn. 5-year-olds will say, let's build a rocket ship and launch it. Okay. So it's a more specific, short-term, doable goal in their minds than growing up to be a unicorn. And it still is something that when you present it to an adult, they're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to help this kid do that. And so what they do is say, that can't be done. We can't do that. It's too hard. You're too little. It's too dangerous. And instead, if we could say, cool idea. Not sure how to do that, but let's see if we can figure it out. We start the research, we do some reading, we do some learning, we do some experimenting, and all through that trying, the child learns an enormous amount, gains an enormous amount of self-worth and competence, and feelings of competence, even if they never get the rocket built and launch it. Yeah. There's such value in pursuing the idea.
I think of how often people are told no. There's no reason for it. It's just no.
Yeah. Nope. Yeah. We're not doing that. Okay.
So moving on.
Yes. To compromise. So the way to think of this, I think, from the child's perspective is up until the age of about 6, you have a relatively small world. At 6-ish, you go out into this much larger world. A lot of kids do. They go from a home environment to a school environment, for example. They now have the ability to ride a bike, go farther distance from home. They have really great communication skills now, so they can have conversations with lots of people. So their world really opens up, and they start finding out that win-win negotiation strategy of the 4-year-old, it's not enough anymore, because it isn't just one person and one person each with one thing they want. It's 29 people each with 35 things they want. And not everybody's going to get all of those things. And so we start having to look at what's most important to us. And this is where values comes in. I think this is where the teaching of an understanding of values, helping children start to see what is it that you value more here, this or that, allows them to choose, okay, out of the 39 things I want, these are my top 5 because, and to be able to articulate that. And so the ability to compromise is really about understanding that the world revolves around what we value, whether we're conscious of it or not.
So when I'm thinking about this, there's a model that I use when I do some work around conflict that I think it's Chaim is the researcher, but it talks about the value of the relationship with the person on a scale of 0 to 5. So how important is the relationship? And then the bottom is how important is the outcome? So when I think about it in terms of organizations, the value of the relationship is generally should always be very high, right? We need each other in a workplace, but I'm just trying to figure out how this would fit with that. But that's what it speaks to is relationships are important too. How much do you value those in terms of how willing are you willing to compromise with somebody? If you don't value the relationship, you're probably not that willing or open to wanting to make sure that they get what they need too.
Oh, that's a great point. I had not heard that framework before, and I like it. It fits really well here. And I had been thinking more about things like, do you value the bottom line of how much we're going to make more than you value the relationship with the community in which you operate, for example?
Interesting. Yeah.
And for a 6-year-old, it can be a lot about how much do I value getting what it is I want over these relationships? Do I value maintaining the relationship? So that's a great piece to bring into it. I hadn't really thought of it from that perspective.
But it does change how your approach is going to be on that.
Absolutely.
So the last one, acceptance.
Acceptance. So this is where we get to this again, I think is a lot about values, but this is where we get to the point where suddenly we have logic now. Okay. So children get logical around age 6, 7. Their minds, there's a big cognitive reorganization in which they start to understand cause and effect and consequences and how things lead from one to another. And so what they finally understand is that doesn't always work the way they think it does. So bad things happen even when you're good. You follow all the rules, you do your homework, you mind your mom, and people get sick. Bad things happen. You lose your house. That being good doesn't mean only good things happen to you. It isn't a true one-to-one good to good. And even worse for a 7-year-old, harder for a 7-year-old to understand, is that good things happen to bad people. People who misbehave, people who behave all kinds of ways they shouldn't behave, get rewarded. Get good stuff in their lives. So it's like this issue of fairness. And so from the little 4-year-old who was concerned with the rules and making sure all the pieces of pie are the same size, you get this 7-year-old who's, the pieces of pie are never the same size. And whether you get the biggest one has nothing to do with how well you behave. And so what they're learning is life is a roller coaster, a wheel that turns, whatever your favorite metaphor is, but there are ups and downs. And we have to be able to go through all of those things. And the ups and downs aren't about us. We have to accept that sometimes we're going to be up high on the roller coaster and looking at the sun and the wind in our face and everything's good. And sometimes we're going to be down at the bottom screaming our lungs out. And both of those things will pass. How do you live with that? How do you accept that and keep getting up every time you fall down?
Boy, this is one that I think is really interesting. And again, here's somebody that in environment, my youngest is a junior. I watched the way, especially around sports, and even at a younger age, I watch how parents, I think, they coddled their kids and they advocated for them much more than they should have in terms of just the natural ups and downs of winning and losing, and you don't get to play every position you want, and the parents jumping in and saying, my kid should be starting, even though they, almost like we've done a disservice to kids in terms of overprotecting them from life is not easy or fair.
I think so. And really terrible things happen sometimes for children. Parents die. People get divorced and parents leave. Children get really sick and have to be in the hospital. In some kids' lives, there are tragedies and traumas beyond what many of us have ever experienced. And so to act as if none of that could happen and that we're the sort of magical fairy adults who can keep everything safe. And you really cannot wrap your child in plastic wrap. And as an adult, what was that? What is that for you now? If you were one of those kids wrapped in bubble wrap, how does that working for you now?
Yeah.
Because as a leader, you got to ride that roller coaster. And sometimes really terrible things happen in your organization, to your team, to you. And how are you going to keep going and keep leading and keep making sure that the whole is held together during those times?
Yeah. It's almost if I were in a hiring position, I would almost want to look to some of the questions around, tell me about some of the struggles you've had. And how did you deal with that? Because the person to me that's protected is set up to fail at some point because life is not that easy. At some point, you're going to be at the bottom of the roller coaster. You're going to be down on the ground with the wheel rolling over your back instead of up at the top with the wind in your face. Yeah. Now, for me, I was older. Both of my parents passed away when I was a teenager, but I was 17 and 18.
I'm so sorry.
But I know that has shaped how I've grown up since then. I think it has shaped how I've tried to raise my 3 kids in terms of the reality of life is not always.
And this was a lesson before I really started coping with my own adverse childhood experiences and went on a recovery journey. This was something that I learned as a young professional. I started out working in university laboratory preschools. Laboratory preschool is a preschool for children, but it's a place where they do child development research, and it's in a university setting. And so I was the director of the preschool and working with all the researchers and all that stuff, but being the director of the preschool and leading the teachers and teaching them how to be good teachers. And what I saw in myself was all the problems that the kids brought to me, took my toy, hit me, all the little problems that happen in the classroom were coming to me to solve. And I was solving them. I was stepping in. I was being the person who took care of business. And I realized very soon that is a really bad idea. First of all, it's exhausting as an adult to be the person who's supposed to solve all the problems, but also it doesn't help children develop the kind of skills that they need to cope with their own problems, to cope with when things start to go south. What do I do? What are the skills? What are the tools? What are the strategies for getting along when things are tough? Yeah.
And it is hard. And I will say we certainly have had our moments where we've probably advocated too much for our kids. But on the flip side, it's really more about, especially I think about teachers. My teacher doesn't like me. Then you need to go to your teacher and find out what you can do, what's going on. Or I'm not playing enough on this team. Then go to your coach and ask them what you can do to develop better skills so that you can earn more time, not I want more time. And I think if we were to step in, they lose the opportunity to figure out how do you navigate for yourself when you're in a work setting and you
Yes, exactly.
So from here, in regards to relationships in the environment we're in now, what do you think is most important? Or is there something that, based on our current environment, that is most important as you deal with organizations?
My kind of take on what is going on for us right now as a culture in this country and really worldwide is there's a lot of tension. It's like a rubber band pulled tight between the need for us to stay the way we've been, to be comfortable, to be in our status quo and the things that we know how to manage, and this constant voice pulling on the other side for change. We need to be more aware of people as unique individuals. We need to be more tolerant of difference. We need to include more diversity. And this is really a place where all of the success strategies are helpful, frankly. But in particular, the acceptance strategy, the 7-year-old success strategy of acceptance is a big one right now. To accept that this is where we are, I think is really important. And to just allow it to be there. To not try to fix, right? To look at what is happening and to assess what our values are. What is it that's important to us as a culture? And not about, that's not a question about what's important to me is to maintain the status quo. What's important to me is to pull for more diversity, but what's important in terms of the outcome? Long term, what do we want to be as a species, maybe, but certainly as a culture? Do we want to be a place where we optimize potential, for example? A lot of potential is lost when we limit ourselves to a small set of acceptable beings. You're only okay if you're like this. And if you're like that, you're not okay. Yeah. What do we lose when we say you're not okay and you can't belong to the belonging club if you don't be like us? What do we lose that we could? This is a time when innovation is desperately needed on all fronts. And so we have to open ourselves, I think, to asking the question, what is it that we really need as a culture? So maybe that takes us back to trust as well. What is it that we need as a species, and what can we do to accept the tension and just move through it, holding the tension, not trying to fix it?
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I think both of negotiation and compromise as well as being so important. And if we're going to get to change, it requires the 4-year-old and the 6-year-old to step up.
Absolutely. Let's pull them out. Let's get them from wherever they're hiding inside of us and brush off the dust. And that takes us back to what I said at the beginning, too. It's never too late. We can absolutely develop all of these strategies as adults, no matter why we don't have them.
Yeah.
But the important first step is saying, I don't really have, that's not a strategy that I'm using successfully. Yeah. Maybe I could negotiate more like a 4-year-old.
So are you familiar? There's a model called SCARF, Dr. David Rock. He talks about 5 social needs, and he identified the model back in, I think it was 2009, but he talks about, SCARF talks about our social need for status, to feel not about a title, but a sense of feeling worth from others and respect. And the next one is around certainty, about understanding what are the rules of the road, what are the expectations. And then the A is around autonomy, feeling as though you have some control over your destiny. Where are you going? And then the R is around relatedness, a need for us to feel as though there's a connection with others around us. And then lastly, it's around fairness, that there's some sense of justice that goes on here. And when I hear you talk about these 7 sort of characteristics or stages that we go through, I think of it the same way when I think of SCARF, in that just by trying to understand what that model is about, the same with these. The more I am able to understand, okay, trust, why is that important to develop? And is it lacking right now? It's almost like a checklist that I can go through to say, what part of this is missing? Where's the hang up here?
And the coaching and the training that I do, that's the process that we follow. Yeah. So I offer what I call development do-overs. And it begins with, each time, let's do a little self-assessment. How's your trust right now? Do you know what you need? Do you know how to get what you need? Have you noticed that there are people who supply what you need and there are other people that don't? Do you know the difference? What does your independence look like? Do you know what you think, what you feel, and what you want? Here's how you can tell. Are you leaking yourself out into the world, or are you being present? So we can look at, how are these things showing up for you as strategies in your adult life? And then let's do some adult processes that mirror or imitate what the child goes through to develop this, so that you can start developing for yourself.
Yeah. Now, obviously, that is all around building self-awareness in the individual. But I would guess as well, it's valuable to build, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, their ability to be aware of others, to pick out these same things.
Exactly. And I actually frame self-awareness as being a lot about awareness, not only of self, but others. Both are important.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I think it would be very difficult to go this alone, intellectually, and just say, I'm just going to read these things and I'll figure it out. You do need somebody, an expert like yourself, that can, I think, almost hold somebody accountable, but in a way that challenges them productively on how to look at each of these areas.
Yes, I certainly hope so. I certainly hope people need me. And I do think that there is a certain amount there's an expertise around what development is. This is a natural trajectory. These are things that children do naturally. They are strategies that children come into the world programmed to use. And if you did not get the support you needed as a child to fully flesh that out and really make it yours, then you still need that help. So I'm your coach, I'm your parent. I don't want to be your parent, but it's the same kind of role. It's the person who says, I see that in you and I'm going to foster it. And here's how we're going to foster that.
Yeah, I love that. This has been so fascinating for me. I really appreciate this. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach out to you and contact you? And we'll have it in the show notes, but it's always nice for you to say.
I'm on all the social, but start at my website and there's all the links to the social. So lcarolscott.com. And if you want to send me an email at carol@lcarolscott.com. I've got a little bookette, 28 pages cover to cover, little PDF called Become Your Sassy Self. And it gives an overview of the 7 strategies, a little bit of a list of questions that are a self-assessment of how you're doing with this stuff today. And I'd be glad to send that back to you.
I love it. Well, I'm gonna get that myself to be my sassy self. Carol, thank you so much for this. I really have appreciated this. I think there's so much value in what you've presented here, and I hope somebody will be able to take this and take it to the next level.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick, for having me. Thanks. I'm really grateful.
Take care.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.